Hello learners, welcome back to the course on learning and development in organization. Today we start a new module, a module which sees the transition from training to learning and development. So we'll try to understand when did organizations start or started understanding the meaning of learning rather than just giving me a training. So we see this transition from training to learning and development, and we'll see how learning and development gets evolved. I'm Dr. Abraham Cyril Issac. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Business, Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. Now, when you look into the theme, you don't learn to walk by following rules. You learn by doing and falling over. So it's basically a process which we learn by doing. So when you can, look into any particular, learning or teaching or training that you have done, all these terms I've used at once here. So when you have done this, you see that how you have imbibed, how you have learned, how you have understood the concept is not merely by reading or following the rules. You specifically do by, actually taking up the task and doing it. So that's the underlying theme when it comes to learning and development. You don't learn to walk by following rules. Rather, you learn by doing and falling over. So let's start today's session by looking into the evolution from training to strategic learning and development. I've used the word strategic for the simple reason that when you look into learning and development, unlike the training which is maybe or which might be for short term, learning always comes in a long term scenario. So when you are looking into learning, be it any types of learning, unlearning, relearning, whatever be the type of learning you are going through, it is essentially the first step towards a long travel. So when you are looking into evolution from training to strategic L&D, you have to understand that learning and development is always something that is there inside. In one of the sessions, I have actually, defined about attitude, and I have clearly illustrated that with examples in our course in OB, in the same NPTEL platform, Organizational Behavior. I have mentioned that attitude, if you look into the textbook, it is written like it's the learned enduring predisposition towards a set of objects or people. So there is a learning there. It's a learned enduring predisposition. The word I want to stress here is enduring. It stays with you for some time. That's why this strategic L&D. So let's understand this particular shift from training to strategic learning and development quickly. When you are looking into this particular shift, you see that the transition from role-specific skill training to aligning learning with the organizational goals become relevant. So when you talk about, the evolution from training to strategic L&D, it has undergone significant transformation over the decades. So what was once simply called training and focused primarily on teaching employees specific skills for the current roles has evolved into a strategic function altogether. Another significant aspect would be employees are nowadays seen as competitive advantage. Please note, focus on the employee development is the key driver of business success. And if you look into the impact, strategic learning and development enhances workforce capabilities, fostering innovation and long-term growth. So this categorically triggers the evolution from training to strategic learning and development. Now let's look into the traditional training model. What was the whole scenario of training all about? It was more of the reactive approach. If you ask me, responding to immediate skill gaps, that was the agenda there. If there is a particular skill gap that is analyzed, the moment the higher management will take it up and will try to mitigate that. So that response to immediate skill gaps made it a reactive approach. Then it was more of an event-based structure, something like a one-time workshops or training sessions. So basically as an event it was conducted. Then it was more content focused, emphasis on delivering some standardized material. That was the key objective there when you look into the earlier or the traditional training models, and it was highly disconnected from business. There was limited alignment with business objectives. So whatever were the standard training and training content that was provided, there was actually no personalized, no tailor-made sort of arrangement there. And if you look into the basic metrics like attendance or satisfaction scores, that was all about measuring the effectiveness of the training. So you did not go beyond it. Let's understand it more deeply, because this understanding is vital to have a clear comprehension of how learning evolved from training. So let's start with this reactive approach in a detailed way. When you're talking about reactive approach, as I mentioned, the traditional training model operated primarily in response mode rather than planning mode. So it's more reactive. So when you look into the gap-based activation, training typically began only after performance issues were identified or new systems were already being implemented. What we can understand is that we had a firefighting mentality whenever we talked about training. Resources were allocated to address the immediate problems. This was something which was vital. Resources were allocated to address immediate problems rather than building future capabilities. So rather than being futuristic, it was all about immediate capabilities. Request fulfillment relationship. Business units would request specific training and training departments would deliver without questioning the underlying needs. So again, the standardized version, whatever was there, that was given. So this is what you understand by a certain level of request fulfillment type of relationship. And you see that programs were developed with minimal lead time, focusing on quick solutions. So there were always short planning horizons. So if I want to take an example, if sales number dropped, a sales training program might be quickly deployed without analyzing whether the actual issue was actually related to selling skills, or maybe product knowledge, or maybe market conditions, or even pricing strategy. So without even understanding the core underlying issue, you were looking into simply training. So please understand, this is the reactive approach we are talking about. Now we look into the event-based structure. Traditional training, if you ask me, was conceptualized as discrete events. There was never a continuity in any of the programs. They were discrete events rather than any sort of continuity that you can see. So it was more workshop centric. That is, you had multi-day classroom sessions where the actual dominant format, or they were more calendar driven. Specifically, you look into training which was scheduled periodically rather than aligned with workflow needs. This would be on the second week of May, then on the third week of June, next training would be on the third week of July, something like that. There was a clear calendar driven approach. Then you look into learning, it was seen as complete once the workshop ended. So there is some beginning, there is some end point. So that was all about the training. You are not very concerned. You are not very concerned about the actual content of the training or the effectiveness of the training. You also look into the limited follow through, minimal reinforcement or application support after training events, which made again training something which is mundane. And finally, if you look into the train and release model, you'll see that employees would attend training, then return to work with full expectations of immediate implementation. So that was only in paper. So a typical scenario might, let's say, involve sending employees to a 2-day leadership workshop with no structured follow-up, no coaching that is happening, or no application exercises back in the workplace. So whatever they have done ends there. So this become a redundant approach altogether. Now let's look into the content focused approach, another traditional model which prioritizes the content delivery. I'll say content delivery was the important aspect when it came to this training. You look into the information transfer. Success was defined by covering all material, rather than ensuring application. So something like completing the syllabus. The entire motto or the entire target objective is to complete the syllabus. So that was just again a very trivial activity. You had standardized material where one size fits all content was there regardless of the learner differences. So please note, when you are talking about learning, this learner differences is significant. Specifically, you have people from different background, you have people of different abilities, capabilities, different talent, different learning abilities, all these aspects are there. So one size fits all content was actually not the right way, but it was part of the content focused approach. Then you had content created based on subject matter expertise rather than a learning science. So somebody knew something, they will come out with that particular topic. They are not looking into the learning science behind that. Then attempting to teach everything about a topic in a single session. Too much of content, trying to bombard with lot of things just to make sure that you complete the particular training. So they do not look into the actual effectiveness of the training or the efficiency of the training for that matter. Rather, they're just looking into that a checkbox is there, training is done. Yes, they want to tick that. Then you look into information heavy slides and handouts with limited engagement. You had dense presentations. You expose learners to large amounts of information, hoping some would stick. So what exactly happened with the content focused approach, if you ask me? This often resulted in information overload with limited retention. So training materials might include, let's say, 100 slide presentations covering every aspect of a topic regardless of the relevance of the topic or relevance to the specific job role. But even if there was no relevance, no significance, it was still covered as a part of a mandate. So this was more about the content focused approach. Now let's understand disconnected approaches from business. When you look into the traditional training, operated largely in isolation from the broader organization goals. So you have, let's say, training objectives defined in learning terms rather than business outcomes. So when you look into the training, business outcomes were seldom the actual deliverable. It was more about, somehow covering the content. There was training development that operated separately from other business functions, having a siloed function altogether. When you are looking into the executives that are delegated training without strategic input, you look into limited leadership involvement. So this was again yet another reason why it was disconnected from business. Then you have activity based justification, where the value demonstrated through training activities rather than actual business impact. So this was again yet another aspect which was bit not relevant to the present day training mechanism. Now there were also some generic programs, if you look into the traditional training models, specifically off-the-shelf solutions, not customized, not tailor-made to the organizational context. And then you look into the emphasis on immediate skill building rather than long-term capability development. What you have with you is a very myopic short-term focus. So the tactical focus was there, but the strategic focus was missing. Now, when you look into the basic measurement angle, you see that you look into, let's say, immediate reaction, measuring how participants felt immediately after training without following long-term application. So it was just, you have undergone training. They might be always in a awe or in an aura that, okay, maybe because of the trainer or maybe because of the training content, but actual application or actual applicability of the training content, that was always questionable. You always have limited accountability, no responsibility for demonstrating the business impact, as I just mentioned before. You also have heavy reliance on post-training satisfaction surveys. You have the smile sheets, the feedback sheets where you generally put the smiley. So it's all rosy, it's all good. The feedback comes up as is very great. But the problem is whether, again, it is applicable, the potential practicality of your training, that is not measured correctly. Then you have the completion metrics where success was measured by the number of employees actually trained. And then you have activity reporting, the focus on training hours delivered rather than the outcome. So the main issue was to see the training hours, how much hours has been put up, that would be monetized, but the outcome was seldom taken into consideration. Then you also look into always the tracking of the resources committed, be it let's say the budget, be it the staff, or even the facilities that are provided. So always the higher management looks into that, but outcome was seldom looked into. So a typical report might highlight that let's say 250 employees completed customer service training with an average satisfaction rating of let's say 4 or 4.2 out of 5 without any data on how customer service metrics actually improved. So the shift away from the model began when organizations recognized that substantial investments in training were yielding limited business results. Strategic L&D emerged from the understanding that learning must be directly connected to organizational performance and future capability needs. Now let's look into the strategic leadership and development emergence. We start with the first aspect of business alignment. You look into different aspects of business alignment, you see that there is a long-term perspective. We'll look into that in greater detail in another 10 seconds. But we also have to look that strategic L&D is long-term. It brings in a proactive planning. It also has a talent management integration activated into it, where you are actually looking into more of a talent pool that has to be in sync with the organization. The strategic L&D emergence talks all about data-driven approach. The decision making essentially has changed considerably with respect to the available data and how it is being utilized. And not to mention and not to forget, the culture development is also a vital part when it comes to organization. Let's look at each of them in a very crisp and clear manner. Let's look into the business alignment. Typically, you'll see that there is a certain level of strategy translation that's happening. You look into L&D professionals, they began partnering with executives to identify specific capabilities needed to execute the business strategies. Let's say if a company's strategy involved expanding internationally. So international expansion is on the rise, then that's a typical example I want to take. Then the learning and development would create programs focused on, let's say, something like cross-cultural competence, something like global market knowledge, or something like distributed team leadership. So these could be some of the possibilities when you're looking into the strategy translation. You look into learning initiatives that became explicitly tied to key performance indicators. You see that, let's say, a sales enablement program or any such learning would define success not just by knowledge gained, but by actual sales increase, the win rates, or the customer retention improvement. So business metrics linkage became relevant. Similarly, you have the value chain integration. L&D specialists, if you ask me, began embedding themselves in business units to understand the operational realities and value creation process. So this allowed them to design learning interventions that addressed actual workflow challenges rather than theoretical needs. Then you have the business case approach, where you are looking into learning initiatives started requiring business justification with the projected ROI, return on investment. So it is more of an outcome based aspect. So this shifted the budget conversations from cost centered, that is, let's say, when you're looking into most of the budget discussions, it is cost centers, like how much are we spending on training, to more of an investment center, that is, what is the business return or what business returns can we expect from this particular program or this particular development. Then you have the executive sponsorship. Senior leaders became actively involved in learning initiatives, not just as sponsors, but as participants and advocates. So this signaled organizational commitment and ensured programs address real leadership concerns. Then you had the industry context. L&D functions began aligning development programs with industry trends and competitive differentiators for that matter. So this meant creating learning experiences that built the precise capabilities needed for market leadership rather than generic best practices. Now we have the proactive planning. You look into strategic L&D shifted from reacting to current needs to anticipating future requirements. You see, organizations began systematically identifying the future skills requirement based on strategic plan, market trends, and even technological developments. Let's take an example. Companies would map the specific digital capabilities needed over a 3 to, let's say, 5-year horizon rather than responding to immediate technology implementation. That's capability forecasting for you. When you look into the scenario planning, you have to understand that L&D teams started using scenario analysis to identify the potential capability needs under different future conditions or future states specifically. So this allowed for more robust development planning that could adapt to changing conditions. Then you have the workforce planning integration. Please note, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, learning strategy became connected to workforce planning, ensuring that capability development aligned with projected hiring, promotion, and succession need. So this created synchronized talent development rather than reactively training whoever happened to be in position. Then you have the strategic skill prioritization. Rather than trying to develop every possible skill, organizations began investing and began identifying and investing heavily in critical differentiating capabilities while finding alternative solutions, be it hiring, partnering, or automation, whatever it is, for other needs. Then you have the development lead time analysis. You look into the development lead time analysis, L&D functions become more sophisticated about understanding how long it takes to build different capabilities, allowing for appropriate sequencing and timing of development investments. Then you have the future-focused competency models. Organizations evolved from static job descriptions to dynamic competency frameworks that could anticipate changing role requirements and emerging capabilities. So these were some of the proactive planning approaches specifically. Then you look into the talent management integration in detail. You will understand that strategic L&D broke down traditional HR silos to create seamless talent development systems. It started with the recruitment alignment. You look into learning capabilities, they became integrated with hiring processes, ensuring that the selection criteria included something like the learning agility. I would want to introduce this term, learning agility specifically, that signifies onboarding directly gets connected to the long-term development plan. Then you have the performance development connection. So performance management evolved from primarily evaluative to more of a developmental aspect. So with real-time feedback and coaching replacing annual reviews in many organizations, learning interventions became directly linked to performance needs identified through ongoing assessment. Then you have the career pathing. You look into organizations, they created clearer development pathways showing the experiences, relationships, and formal learning needed to progress. So this provided employees with roadmaps for growth while helping the organization develop specific capabilities at each level. Then you have succession management, learning initiatives that became explicitly connected to succession planning with targeted development, experiences preparing high potential employees for specific future roles rather than generic leadership development. Then there were talent reviews under the talent management integration. Regular talent assessment processes began incorporating learning data and development progress, creating more holistic views of organizational bench strength. Then there were integrated talent systems. Technology platforms evolved to connect learning data with performance, succession, and even to a certain extent career information, enabling more sophisticated talent analytics and development planning. Then we go to the data-driven approach. You look into the data-driven approach, you see that there is a typical learning experience data moving more to a data-driven approach. So you see learning analytics a part of it. You see impact measurement, predictive models, ROI, methodology, etc. We'll quickly look into this. When you are looking into learning analytics in detail, you see that organizations began systematically collecting and analyzing data about learning activities, their progress, and even their outcomes. So this went beyond completion rates to include engagement metrics or even some application indicators and performance correlations. Then you have impact measurement. You look into sophisticated evaluation methodologies emerged to demonstrate causal connections, let's say, between learning interventions and even business outcomes. So a causal connection, if is established, it gives more impact, and that impact measurement would be more significant. So control groups, time series analysis, and multivariate approaches replace the simple pre-post measurements which you usually used to conduct before. Then you have the predictive models. Advanced organizations, if you ask me, started developing predictive analytics that could identify which learning interventions would most likely succeed for specific audiences and purposes. Then you also see that there was a detailed analysis of how learners interacted with the content, experiences, let's say something like digital tracking or surveys or observations inform continuous improvement, not only in delivery but also in the design aspect. Then you have the ROI methodology. Rigorous approaches to calculating the financial returns on learning investment gain traction, converting capability development into terms that financial executives could evaluate alongside other investment options. And now we finally move on to the culture part, the culture development. Strategic L&D recognized the sustainable learning is the way to go ahead, and it required systemic cultural support. I repeat, systemic cultural support. So the learning organization principles were typical to organizations that began applying what we have already discussed in the previous sessions, Peterson's concept of systems thinking, personal mastery, mental models. Please recollect and go through the videos. Shared vision and even team learning to create environments where development was continuous and embedded. You look into the leadership behaviors where, development efforts focused on helping leaders. Model learning behaviors provided coaching and even create psychological safety that encouraged experimentation and growth. You had knowledge management systems helping a long way in culture development. Formal processes, technologies for capturing, sharing, and applying organization knowledge became critical components of a learning culture. You also see organizations designed work process that explicitly incorporated reflection. It incorporated feedback and knowledge exchange rather than treating them as separate learning activities. You also tend to understand there were compensation and recognition programs that evolved to incentivize knowledge sharing, skills development, and learning application rather than just short-term results. Then you see that learning functions began facilitating structured approaches to experimentation, to prototyping, and iterative development as core organizational capabilities. So innovation support emerged as core organization capabilities. Then you have the progressive organizations that began explicitly allocating resources, be it the time, the space, the technology, platforms, dedicated to reflection and development rather than expecting learning to happen in the margin. So you see the emergence of truly strategic L&D represented a fundamental rethinking of the functions, purpose and value. So rather than being a training provider, responding to requests, L&D became a strategic partner, helping to build organizational capabilities directly connected to competitive advantage and future success. So this transformation required new skills from L&D professionals, different expectations from business leaders, and more sophisticated approaches to planning, to delivering and measuring learning effectiveness. This was more clear with respect to the learning and development rather than training. Now, let's look into the evolution of L&D roles very quickly. From trainers to performance consultants, we see traditional training roles focus primarily on content delivery. But when you look into a new way of learning and development rather than training, it was more about the tailor-made, performance-oriented, outcome-oriented activity. So the evolution to performance consulting represents a fundamental shift, especially you look into problem analysis. The moment you have an issue, you go into problem analysis. Instead of accepting the training request at face value, performance consultants analyze business issues to determine if learning interventions are actually needed, or if, let's say if other solutions or something like process changes or tool improvements or incentive adjustments are the way to go ahead, not the training. So maybe that is the first and the foremost way to go ahead. There was a root cause investigation. These professionals use methodologies like, let's say, Six Sigma or human performance technology to identify the actual causes of performance gap, which often include factors beyond the knowledge deficit. Then you have the solution design. Rather than defaulting to training, performance consultants develop comprehensive performance improvement plans that might include job aids or workflow changes or, let's say, coaching or environmental adjustments or even targeted learning. Then there are possibilities of business partnership. They work as advisors to business leaders, asking probing questions and challenging assumptions rather than simplifying taking orders for the training courses. So when you look into the evolution of L&D specifically, you see that performance consultants design evaluation approaches that connect learning initiatives to business outcomes before implementation begins. When you are looking into the evolution of L&D, I'll take an example to make it more lucid. When faced with a declining customer satisfaction score, a performance consultant wouldn't immediately create a customer service training program. Instead, they would analyze, let's say, the call data, observe interactions, interview customers and employees, and perhaps determine that the issue typically stems from a combination of system limitations or policy constraints, and knowledge gaps required a multifaceted solution. This emerges, this underscores the evolution of L&D roles, that is from administrators to data analysts and business partners. So this is more of the skin in the game. Now let's look into content creators to curators and experience designers. You look into the content curation, you see finding, evaluating, organizing and contextualizing existing high quality learning resources rather than creating everything internally. So this involves identifying the best available materials, be it, let's say, articles or videos or, let's say, courses, what you're doing right now, from external sources and internal knowledge repositories. Another significant aspect here would be the experience design. Creating a holistic learning journey that combine multiple modalities and touch points over time rather than standalone courses. So this typically employs design thinking principles to create engaging, memorable and effective learning experiences. Then you have user experience focus, which looks into applying principles from consumer digital experiences. You have social learning architecture, where designing environments and processes that facilitate knowledge sharing and collaborative learning among employees takes the front seat. You have the learning environment design, creating physical and virtual spaces that support different types of learning activities and knowledge exchange. So a modern L&D professional might develop a leadership program that includes pre-selected articles like TED Talks for self-study, facilitated discussions, application exercises, etc. Next, we look into the shift from program managers to learning ecosystem architects. You look into this shift, you see a lot about platform integration. Connecting various learning technologies like, let's say, LMS, LXP, or some of the knowledge management systems or collaboration tools for that matter into a more cohesive system. Cohesive ecosystem that share data and provide seamless user experience. You have the learning pathways, creating flexible development journeys that allow for personalization while ensuring critical capabilities. Then you have the significant resource allocation. You look into making strategic decisions about which learning needs deserve custom development versus external content versus experimental approaches. You have the governance structure. You look into developing frameworks that balance centralized quality control with decentralized responsiveness to business unit needs. Then you have the technological strategy, making forward-looking decisions about learning technology investments based on organizational needs and industry trends. So an ecosystem architect might develop a capability development framework that specifies how different learning modalities connect, how content is created and maintained, how user experiences are designed, and how the entire system evolves over time. Now we look into how the shift is from administrators to data analysts and business partners. Please note, ladies and gentlemen, you are looking into the age of learning analytics. Specifically using data science techniques to understand patterns in learning, engagement, effectiveness, and outcomes. You have the impact visualization. Impact visualization, creating dashboards and reports that communicate the business value of learning initiatives to executives and stakeholders. You have predictive modeling, specifically using the historical data to forecast which interventions will be most effective for different employee segments. Then you have the business intelligence, typically connecting learning data with broader organizational metrics to identify correlations and potential causal relationships and association. Then you have the strategic consultation, advising the business leaders on capability development strategies aligned with business objectives. So a modern L&D professional might develop a dashboard showing how sales training completion correlates with sales performance across different regions, across different products and experience level. Using this data to continuously improve program design and target interventions where they can have the greatest impact. Now let's look into the evolution of external partnerships. If you look into the change of traditional vendors to strategic partners, this shift, you will see that there are elements of co-creation, risk-sharing arrangements, embedded expertise, innovation pipeline, technology integration. So you look into, instead of, let's say, purchasing off-the-shelf solutions, organizations now collaborate with partners to develop customized approaches that reflect their specific culture, their specific challenges. So co-creation, is one of the significant aspects. You look into risk sharing, performance-based contracts where vendors' compensation is partly tied to achieving defined business outcomes rather than simply delivering services. You have embedded expertise where long-term relationships where external specialists work alongside internal teams, transferring knowledge and building organizational capability. You have innovation pipeline, as I mentioned, where strategic partners bring emerging trends, research findings, and even cross-industry insights that help the organization stay ahead of learning innovations. Then you have technology integration. You look into partners increasingly provide not just content, but technology platforms and integration services that connect with internal systems. Let's take an example. Rather than hiring a training vendor to deliver leadership workshops, an organization might engage a strategic partner to help design an entire leadership content, architecture, including assessments, coaching, experiential learning, or sometimes even technology platforms and measurement approaches. Another classic shift would be content providers to learning experience platforms. You see, this is embellished by subscription models, moving from one course or one-time course purchases to ongoing access to continuously updated content libraries. You have the consumer grade experiences, learning platforms that offer, if I can use the word, Netflix-like personalized recommendations, intuitive interfaces, or even seamless mobile experiences. You have IC integration capabilities, platforms that can incorporate internal content alongside external resources and connect to organizational systems. You have the benefit of AI-powered personalization, intelligent systems that can actually recommend learning based on a role, based on the career stage of the individual, or based on the interest of the individual, or even the organizational priorities. You also have the content plus community, platforms that combine expert content with peer learning opportunities, mentor connectedness, or even collaborative experiences. So we'll see that organizations have shifted from buying individual e-learning courses to partnering with platforms like LinkedIn Learning. If you can take an example of Udemy Business or Coursera for Business, NPTEL, that provide comprehensive content libraries with personalization engines, the integration capabilities I just mentioned, and even analytics. Then you see a shift of educational institutions to corporate universities and custom programs. There are custom degree programs now. Partnerships where universities create tailored degree or certificate programs addressing specific organizational capability needs. You have faculty integration going on now. Being a faculty, I can tell academic experts becoming ongoing advisors and contributors to internal development programs rather than just one-time speakers. You have research partnerships, collaborations, where organizations provide research opportunities while gaining early access to findings and applications. You have corporate universities, internally branded and managed learning organizations that provide cohesive development experiences aligned with organizational culture and strategy. You have adjunct relationships, corporate experts teaching at partner institutions while, sometimes academic faculty contributing to the internal program. So these are some of the possible shifts that typically underline the educational institution shift towards corporate universities and customer programs. Let's take an example to understand this. Instead of simply sending executives to, let's say, a standard MBA programs, companies like GE, Apple, and McDonald's have created their own corporate universities with customized curricula addressing their specific business challenges. So often in partnership with academic institutions. So that is the way to go about it. Then you have a shift of industry networks to communities of practice. This is interesting because you see facilitated knowledge exchange, moving beyond informal networking to structured communities with defined processes for capturing and sharing the insights. You see cross-industry learning, deliberately seeking insights from adjacent industries rather than just direct competitors. You have collaborative problem solving, communities that work together on common challenges rather than simply exchanging information. You have digital enablement, technology platforms typically supporting ongoing connection and collaboration. And finally, you have shared investment, joint funding. It could be for research, could be for tools or learning resources that benefit all community members. You see, organizations like NASA or Xerox and Shell, they have developed sophisticated communities of practice that bring together both the internal and the external experts around specific domains, be it deep sea drilling safety, be it AI ethics, or even supply chain resilience for that matter, to accelerate the collective learning and problem solving. So typically in this session, we detailed on the importance of learning and development. Most importantly, we tried to understand how we shift from training to learning and development. Gone are those days, please listen to me carefully. Gone are those days when there is an immediate skill requirement. People come to you, to the organization, and you will try and run a skill development program. Gone are those days. Now we are looking into an era where prima facie you are not doing only the skill gap analysis. You are looking more into the possibilities of developing organizational capabilities. So what all programs, what all initiatives, what all curriculum can actually increase the organizational capability, we look into that. So those programs, bringing them, executing them, and having a clear outcome measurement towards the organizational capability, that underlines the shift from mere training and development to strategic learning and development. This was the underlying theme for today's talk. See you with more insights into learning and development in the next session. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.